Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable, carbon neutral society. And I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. Pardon my voice, I've had COVID. What we're going to talk about today is cattle farming. It's one of the most significant contributors to deforestation globally. And consumers, along with grocers who want to verify the quality of the beef they sell, are asking for increased supply chain transparency. Tracing where products come from is a challenge, as we've discussed before with Vivian Tai, Director of Innovation at GS1, which is the global nonprofit organization that provides the Universal Product Code, the UPC, the barcode found on most packaging. Vivian returns today to talk beef with Jason Berryhill, who's co-founder of Wholechain. They work together to develop a new standard for cattle traceability using innovative blockchain technologies. It's called Wholechain Cattle Traceability, a system for verifying compliance with various standards, including those related to animal welfare and feeding practices. Wholechain's blockchain-based system ensures that information about the entire supply chain, such as where the cattle were raised, what they were fed, and how they were treated, can be tracked and authenticated if this data is collected by the producers. This will be a wide-ranging conversation in which we explore their collaboration and how it will provide you more information about the beef you buy and how Wholechain's platform might be used to calculate environmental impacts, such as deforestation and methane emissions associated with growing and producing beef, while helping companies comply with regulations that shape the world's food supply, like the Food and Drug Administration's Food Safety Modernization Act Rule 204, which requires businesses to maintain records of food production, processing, and distribution to enable rapid identification of contaminated sources during a foodborne illness outbreak. We'll also discuss how Wholechain's technology could expand beyond cattle to other industries, creating more transparent and sustainable global supply chains. You can learn more about Wholechain cattle traceability at gs1us.org, and then look for the article called Wholechain Cattle Traceability. Get ready for an important conversation about the future of the food supply. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. We're back, and welcome back to the show, Vivian. It's good to have you here for another conversation about GS1. And Jason Berryhill of Wholechain, welcome to the show. How are you both doing today?
Still recovering a bit from Climate Week last week, but it's been really busy actually.
Climate Week gave me COVID, so it just seems to be the annual super spreader event that we all get together and share our diseases as well as our concern about the planet. Vivian, we've talked in the past about GS1's aspirations to trace the entire supply chain and the entire circular economy eventually. What inspired you to partner with Wholechain to develop a traceability solution for the cattle industry in particular?
Yeah, so I would say that it was a series of great coincidences that aligned well. So first of all, just for a bit of context, I work on the innovation team, if you recall, and one of the mandates that we're really given is to look at around the corner for the industries that we serve and evaluate what are some of the emerging trends or technologies that could really extend the reach and relevance of GS1 standards. And with that, we really look at the different, emergent use cases along the supply chain. So that really asks us to look at, problems at hand. And so when I had come across what Jason's been working on, when we were catching up, this cattle opportunity was really valuable because it really started at the farm level. And I would say that that level of being upstream is something that we at GS1 US we're very interested in, and we're still trying to get a good foothold in. So cattle was, I think, a very impactful industry for us to work with Wholechain on.
So, Jason, tell us what Wholechain allows somebody to learn about a cattle, or actually about beef, a grocery chain buyer, for instance. What will they be able to determine when they're considering a purchase?
That's a great question. So, and it's interesting that the driver right now is actually leather. believe it or not, because of the EU deforestation regulation, concerns of deforestation within supply chains, and this is across multiple commodities. The context of a lot of our work for this that we had modeled out was in Brazil, but there's other geographies where that's the case. And so, and these are, brands throughout the world that are very concerned about these issues. And so, what can you track is it's kind of open-ended. There's a lot of things you can track. Post Climate Week, I've already had a conversation about using that exact same framework that we talked about for monitoring whether leather had come from farms that had contributed to deforestation. That's something you could track, the provenance of an item. But then also the conversations I've had since is all around tracking emissions footprint. If it's on the beef side, it could be things like food safety concerns. So there's all types of data that can be tracked. And what GS1 standards do is provide that framework and that underlying standard so that different solutions like ours can communicate with each other. I would say that's one of the biggest challenges of traceability right now is the ability for solutions like ours to be able to communicate with each other. It's very unlikely that every supply chain and all, throughout the supply chain would use Wholechain, and it doesn't have to. Instead, with standardization, you can have different solutions along the way that can all align around the GS1 standard, specifically EPCIS, which is this standard we're talking about, and that from that, they can share data seamlessly with each other.
Data standardization, absolutely a critical factor to consider. How did you arrive at the particular things that you decided to put into Wholechain to begin with? What were the important criteria to track?
Interesting. Yeah. So, our tool is like a templating engine for collecting data in a supply chain. So actually, we don't make that determination. Our customers do. So we basically provide the tool. It's kind of like saying, with Gmail, how did you decide what email to send? Well, Gmail doesn't make that decision. You do, if you're a Gmail user. And so they make the determination on what they want to track, what those specific key data elements are. Now, there's certain things that are kind of have-tos. You have to have an identifier, so a serial or lot identifier. You have to have things like location, date, time. These sorts of things you need to have. But then in addition to that, there's other data that can be captured, along a supply chain that might be valuable to those specific users. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we've been working on with Vivian and the innovation team there is enabling those types of capabilities, as well as being able to really promote this idea throughout different softwares that, hey, this is an answer that can be kind of an underlying framework that other things can be built on top of. And I think in 5 years, we'll be tracking different things than we are today. A lot of it's aspirational right now. A lot of times they're just trying to track just, where it came from. But I think in the future, we'll see more of that innovation.
Really interesting. So how do I know if everybody can put in whatever they want, that this is actually standardized data? So is there a deliberation mechanism to say, when I say this about beef, I mean this rather than something else?
Precisely. Now that, sorry, I should have been more specific there. It's not quite like an email for sure. It's not open-ended in that sense. It's more like our system. You can build the capture tools that are specifically aligned to the standard. How those things get expressed is something that we do in the background, but what data is captured and what is able to be used by the supply chains, that's really more up to the supply chain. So in, another example of this same kind of effort would be a group called the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, which I'm on the board of as well, that also, again, had decided on here's some things around IUU, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, that were the priorities. And that was added in as a framework. So similarly with what we're doing in cattle, there's specific things that are, desired. But again, those things can, as much as we had data that was around EUDR or other, regulatory concerns, now you're seeing things around emissions and other kind of buyer concerns. So
now, Vivian, how does GS1 play in this as the global facilitator of product information? Are you counseling beef production companies about how to jump in and use Wholechain?
No, actually, I would say that Wholechain would be the one to
Okay.
educate these folks on what the standards are, or maybe not, maybe they don't even care about that. Maybe it's just about collecting the right types of information, because at the end of the day, the standards are there to be used for interoperability purposes, so that any technology provider, not just a Wholechain, would be able to derive value out of it. And this is really about having a common language for all participants along the supply chain to speak. So you'll notice that for EPCIS, which is really the magic where a lot of the events that we track happen. EPCIS, by the way, stands for Electronic Product Code Information Services, which is a whole mouthful. It really allows us to talk about critical tracking events, which would be, transforming, packing, shipping, transportation of a product or an object, and then key data elements, which would be the who, what, when, where, whys of the supply chain.
The last time you were here, we talked about what consumers in the long run are going to be able to know about the food that they purchase, for instance. Is this something that a consumer will be able to scan and find out whether or not, for instance, there's deforestation involved in the beef that I'm purchasing?
Yes, exactly. Like, so really at the end of the day, it's up to the producer or the brand to be able to surface this information. And one of the ways that they could really neatly do so today is through a QR code at the finished good level. They'd be able to surface really as much information as they deem necessary for transparency for their consumers.
Another thing I imagine this would allow a government to do is control what was coming across its borders. And for instance, say beef that's associated with deforestation is prohibited, and that falls in this category, so we won't take it. Jason, is that kind of a conversation going on at the international level at an implementable place as compared to an abstract, policy conversation?
So I'll give you a different illustration than EUDR because I can speak more specifically to it. Is the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has a new regulation called the Food Safety Modernization Act, Rule 204, around high-risk food categories. And the rule itself doesn't specify EPCIS or GS1 standards. However, it's clearly written in alignment with those. And actually, if you look in the documentation from the FDA, they internally use EPCIS as their tool, and they intend to release tools for the industry based on EPCIS, because at the end of the day, standardization, it really is what enables, it is the framework for so many different innovations. And I usually just give kind of different illustrations. I mean, I think one is just, this is kind of a new frontier. And as we tame this frontier, really what GS1 is those railroad tracks going across that frontier. But what goes on the train, a lot of different things can happen, and where that train goes, and there's so many different, where that train stops. That's really up to the solution providers like us. Whereas what GS1 does is specifically laying those tracks and making it, the exact width and the exact, specifications to where systems like ours, we're more like the train traveling on it. And, I could go into endless illustrations like that. And it's because, I've said several times in forums like this, that if you look at the past 300 years of technological innovation, you're really looking at the history of standardization.
Yeah, in fact, trains were the very first, the gauge of trains were the very first standardized thing internationally.
But I mean, electrical plugs, you wouldn't have the electrical grid today if you had to, kind of hardwire things to your home because we didn't have standardized plugs. The automobile industry and kind of standardized fuel spigots. If I had to look for a Subaru gas station, as opposed to just going up and filling up my car, it would change the entire auto industry. And so really you can look across different industries. You just see more and more as standardization happens. That's what allows these things to reach ubiquity. And that's also the foundation where so much innovation can take place and flourish. And that's really, I think, what GS1 is doing very well is being that facilitator. So they're not, some of these questions, they're not focused on Wholechain. They're focused on being that layer. And now we get to build on top of it. And then it's up to us to compete, to get out there in the marketplace and to be a solution for, our customers and for industries.
This raises an interesting question, which as consumers, many folks are interested in avoiding environmental impacts, negative social impacts. They want to understand the carbon and water pollution associated with the things they buy. How do consumers have the potential to shape what they can learn from a product. What would you recommend they do in order to get that kind of information about the purchase that they're about to make?
I'm thinking about this because as a consumer, sometimes I feel like I wouldn't even know the right questions to ask access that information. So I think part of it is actually asking the consumers to define what their values are, what they care about, so that brands can respond accordingly, because it makes absolutely no sense for a brand to offer up like all information about their supply chain. Like there has to be some parameters around what's relevant, right? So I think it's really up to consumers to voice their what they care about. And I would say that brands today, they might already offer a lot of that information, but maybe in a broad stroke kind of way, or
Right.
maybe in a way that's so general that it could be applicable to anything. It will require momentum from both ends, both the consumers and the brand's receptivity to what the consumers are asking for.
It's
And
interesting. I mean, you can imagine an environment where I set a set of standards and for myself, and the product has to meet it instead of me going out looking for a product that fits my requirements. That's a really interesting idea, but of course, there's a whole set of privacy issues involved there. Jason, what are your thoughts about that?
well, I was just going to build on it. I mean, this is another place where I think GS1 is laying the groundwork for that type of communication to consumers. Because just like EPCIS, we've got something that's really more of a B2B function in communicating data between stakeholders. You also have GS1 Digital Link, and you have the and I can get into what that is, but also the sunsetting of the barcode, which there's information about on GS1's website in 2027, or starting in 2027, where that will become a 2D barcode that will be scannable, potentially by consumers.
Mhm.
And so, by having that right now, if you go on to a lot of different brands, we work with a lot of brands on that capability to do the QR code. We have a tool specifically for that where they can communicate much more information about their brand and the ways that they're complying with social and environmental concerns. But it can start to look like NASCAR with all these different QR codes and everything, just to be able to have just the barcode that has multiple different uses, one at the register, and also to be able to scan by consumers. Ultimately, what that comes back to is, when GS1 enables that capability coming up with the 2D barcode, and then connecting to Digital Link, which can connect to more content or can connect to the register, or you have all these capabilities, and that too will just change a lot. You'll have brands that can communicate so much more because the packaging is very limiting. So
Absolutely. And Vivian, the last time when you were on, we spoke about the new version, the 2D QR code.
Yes.
Can you just remind everybody briefly what that will allow us to do in terms of the sharing information, and even down to the individual product unit versus just a description of an entire set of products?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like, thank you so much for bringing up GS1 Digital Link, because I feel like that is a very under-leveraged standard right now. It essentially creates a web-enabled experience for a product. So consumers these days are quite acquainted with, pointing their phones at QR codes and getting more, led to a web page of sorts. But being able to do that, plus being able to check out at point of sale, with that same barcode, means that you're actually able to have a dynamic experience based on just one data carrier. So
yeah.
a 1D barcode, which is, the typical rectangle barcode that you're used to seeing, that can only encode so much information in that singular data carrier. But with the 2D, with a QR code, that basically you're able to access a whole repository of information, so that you can really get creative with the amount of information that you'd like to share. So whether that's traceability information, sustainability or recyclability information, or even consumer engagement types of experiences, you can all have that in a 2D data carrier or a 2D barcode. And you'd be able to scan through point of sale with that same thing. So you wouldn't have one product that has like a bajillion different data carriers on it. And this is also exciting for, a brand's marketing team, because now their valuable real estate on the packaging is they free up space essentially.
So I think we've opened the door to a really interesting world of opportunity to know a lot more about the food that we buy and the food that we sell. But we need to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Now back to the conversation about the Wholechain cattle traceability standard with GS1's Director of Innovation, Vivian Tai, and Wholechain co-founder, Jason Berryhill. By the way, during the break, we were talking, and I want to ask Vivian in particular to clarify about the sunsetting of the traditional rectangular barcode. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so actually it's Sunrise 2027 for the 2D barcodes, but it's not a sunset for all the other data carriers that exist out there. So our humble UPC barcode, the rectangular one that you're familiar with, that's not going anywhere. In fact, that's still going to be quite useful all along the upstream supply chain, or where a lot of data isn't just, it's not necessary, right? So that's still going to help facilitate, supply chain visibility, and that shouldn't inspire panic if people heard sunrise. It's not a sunset of any means.
Okay, so there will be barcodes and advanced barcodes, and
Yes,
they'll coexist. All right.
exactly.
So, Jason, the grocery chain Wegmans has been using Wholechain in its seafood supply chain. Tell us what their experience has been. What are the benefits they reported?
Yeah. Well, I think to do that, let me contextualize kind of the old way of a retailer taking an action like this, and then kind of the new way, what we see where standards are very, very important. So the old way is this, and this is true across industries, across any type of major buyer, where major buyer talks to a person like me and says, oh, we like these guys, okay, let's go ahead and use that system. And then they tell all their suppliers, use that system. Now, that's a problem. Because first of all, it doesn't do us any favors necessarily, because it makes people feel really forced. And I found that not to be a great customer relationship. But also, beyond that, let's say that those same suppliers are using other systems for other customers. Now, all of a sudden, maybe they have to have 2 or 3 systems. It's a bit of a mess. And so, honestly, it's kind of a step backwards rather than a step forward. We think that the kind of new way, and I think it's rightly that Wegmans is the one doing that, because they are very much innovators in the space. And I would say, I think they're very well known as taking these types of actions. They have instead said, look, we're going to not mandate the system, but mandate the standard. And so they're really saying with EPCIS, and specifically the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, that framework, which uses EPCIS, we're going to ask all of our suppliers to use that. And they can use Wholechain, but they can use any system they want. They say, we use Wholechain, and here's how we're using it, but you can use any system you want, because it can communicate to Wholechain as long as it can accommodate that standard. And the GDST, the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, actually has a test where that can be verified. So, which is like a mock traceability system that uses the EPCIS standard. So I have to be able to demonstrate into that test that I can send it data, and then it can interpret it, and then I can receive data from it, and then I can interpret it. And so, we actually have an automated script on Wholechain where every day we take that test and we pass that test. And so, but that allows us to see, okay, different systems can share with each other, because again, on that sort of the rails of that standard.
And so you can tell whether or not your supply chain, in a nutshell, is intact on a day-to-day basis.
Precisely. And two, without having to burden all these different suppliers with one single system. Because what happens if I double my price or whatever else, right? You shouldn't, no one entity should be stuck that way. It should be instead a situation where the standard, exactly. And so it creates that common framework where they can collect more data. And again, I think this is true of Wegmans, and I think this is true of the broader food system. This is just the beginning. And I think Wegmans would say the same thing. If you look at Wegmans' seafood supplier policy, it's basically saying, look, we're doing this for FSMA 204, for the GDST, but this is the beginning. And they kind of leave open that there's going to be more and more innovation in terms of the data they can collect and the things that they can do with it, which again is a very Wegmans thing to do, because they're always looking to push the boundaries of kind of best practice.
So if I'm buying seafood at Wegmans, what can Wegmans tell me about that seafood that wouldn't have been possible, say, 10 years ago?
Well, certainly you can get more information about the, I would say what you can get is interesting. Wegmans is collecting all this information. Wegmans is an interesting one. So you mentioned earlier the QR code capability, which we have, and we work with several major seafood brands, some of the largest, on using that capability for consumers. Wegmans is different because Wegmans doesn't want that to be in a QR code. They want that to be in their service people at the counter. And they want that to be a relationship with the customer. And so what really happens is Wegmans is able to collect more information about the those supply chains and the, first of all, where the seafood comes from, but beyond that, different indicators of environmental and social responsibility. But then they are the ones that can communicate that to customers. And I think that's what we've seen overall is it's not so much that consumers, scan a scan a QR code and then sort of make a decision on the spot.
Right.
What they're really doing is making a brand choice based on trust. And I think, again, Wegmans is a good embodiment of that because people trust that brand. And so they trust that brand, based on transparency, based upon their efforts that they see continually. And one of those is traceability.
Well, and that's really a critical point. It's the storytelling that the brand is able to do based on the access to information, which is so much deeper today than it was, again, 10 years ago. How do you imagine educating consumers to be aware of and ask for this kind of information? Because many of us would never have thought, even in the first place, of the carbon footprint of an item of food until very recently as well. What can brands do to say, we've got this information and we're going to help you make it relevant to you?
Well, I'll say that an example also is like Chicken of the Sea and their Genova brand of tuna, tuna cans. If you go onto those, you can see a QR code and you can scan that, and you can see down to vessel level information that went into that production lot that went into that can. And so I think just first of all, putting it on the packaging and starting to get consumers more familiar with it. But again, I don't believe it's because of consumers going on and just scanning each one and seeing which vessels went in. It's really just that decision of transparency is making consumers then say, that's a transparent brand with me. I trust that brand.
Yeah.
And that trust allows people, because to Vivian's point, like there's so many different things that people can embody in terms of their values that, why they make purchase decisions. I think generally though, you could kind of bring that together in, well, transparency is a big one. When brands are more transparent, it tends to make consumers more confident. Okay, this is the brand that I want to prefer whenever I'm at the grocery store.
Yeah, you can't overwhelm people with too much information. And I really don't imagine that people are going to say, I only want fish caught by this one boat.
Exactly. Did
But
Ed catch this one? Yeah, exactly.
the fact that you can tell that story, if asked, is a very interesting one. And I think is going to open up a world of new storytelling opportunities.
Yep.
Vivian, I'm curious, do companies have privacy and data security concerns about exposing the depth and breadth of their supply chain in a way that is interrogable by a potential malicious actor?
That is a really good question, because I think actually a lot of companies that may be hesitant to embark on a traceability journey, part of it must be fear-based, I imagine, because it could potentially open them up to interrogation and lawsuits and all of that. So for a company to be confident enough to have traceability as part of their journey, that's actually a very good sign, because there's no lying about the data that they collect. Or, I mean, yeah, you could, if you really tried, I'm sure like you could forge it, but like there's
Sure.
guards against that. And I think the threat or the fear of potential legal pursuits, like that is actually one of a huge driver for honest transparency and traceability.
This is a challenge across the board as we become a more transparent society. Additional risk comes with that transparency, and I think we're also looking for the other kinds of benefits that come from that data sharing. And so, Jason, you mentioned earlier Rule 204, which has to do with when there's a food contamination issue.
Yeah.
Also, take this kind of data about what people have consumed, integrate it with epidemiological and healthcare data, their records, to understand the impact of their diet on their health over time. I mean, it seems to me like we also are opening that kind of a new direction in terms of understanding the total impact of our lifestyle.
So I actually previously came from the mobile industry, where I've seen standards at work for sure. Standards did more for the mobile industry than the touch screen, by the way. 10, 15 years ago, I don't think we really even imagined where mobile would take us. And I don't know that we're fully imagining right now where traceability will take us and more of this data collection. In fact, I genuinely believe traceability, we won't even think of it like a term anymore, because it'll be an assumption, not an aspiration. It's only thought of this way because it's an aspiration in many supply chains. And so the more it becomes an assumption, we'll just think of these like very common data pipelines that we can do a lot with, both organizationally within different, enterprises, but also societally, in terms of what you're saying, how data can be combined and we can use it. I think it'll lead to greater efficiencies. I think the Food Safety Modernization Act, what you're saying is, one of reducing risk. But I think the flip side of that, what will be achieved is a lot of efficiencies. And again, and then on and on and on. And I don't think we're fully even thinking about some of the things that can be done, as well as societally. Like imagine how little monitoring and measurement we do with the different commodities that we use across the world. And what more we could do if we did better measurement of that. What kind of management could we do globally as more things are measured? Well, I think quite a lot. I think this will have a huge impact. I told the people at the Climate Week event we were at, I mean, this is one of the most impactful things is first data standardization and then the capability of doing greater measurement. Because, in terms of social and environmental concerns, that really is the first step. And once we get that done right, I think we can do so many things.
I'm curious, Vivian, has GS1 thought about the opportunity in aggregating the information on behalf of the consumer about what they purchased, just storing that and making that available for the kind of analysis I was just mentioning, like, is your health being impacted by what you eat? There's a huge privacy issue there, but your organization, unlike almost any other, because it's a nonprofit and global already, is in an interesting position. Have you thought through those kinds of ideas?
Okay, if I'm being honest, that's definitely above my pay grade because standards are always going to be consensus based, and unfortunately, there's no standards police to go around to hold the baton over someone's head, right? So because of that aspect of our position, it doesn't make sense for us right now to be holders of all of that information because brands ultimately want to be in control of their own like their data, how transparent they want to be with it, and that decision I think should lie with the brands.
I agree that the decision should lie with the brands or the consumers, which is the other side of that page. But it's interesting to me because, Jason, your point about mobile computing, I actually wrote some of the first books about mobile computing in the early 90s.
Nice.
Right. It's difficult to articulate how much what was absolutely magical then has become totally mundane and everyday today, to the degree that we don't think about that as complexity. But there's a lot of complexity behind the world that we are now just beginning to uncover through the standards-based efforts you're doing. You've talked earlier about what you might apply this to in other industries. Where else can we use Wholechain?
Well, I think where else can we use Wholechain and where else can we use standardization? I think across so many commodities, I think right now there's a lot of opportunity that we're looking at in, for example, the mining space around rare minerals that go into things like car batteries, so many different things today. Honestly, there's not really a limit. There's some things that are probably more challenging than others. We've started work in soy, which is kind of like tracing water in a river. And so, and it goes into everything, either directly or indirectly. And so it is a challenge. It is a particular challenge, but there are so many different industries that this could apply to, and in some ways is already being applied to. And it's like that saying that the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And so I think we'll see more and more of that. And I think one of the things that we tried to do at Climate Week was to engage brands, NGOs, and others around what standardization can do across these different verticals and across these different industries. And then once we have that, where we can go. So in many ways, we almost sell the standard more than we do Wholechain because we just feel like it's so impactful. And then our tool, we feel very comfortable about our ability to compete in that place. But what it does is it kind of commoditizes us in a way, right?
Mhm.
It puts us in a position where we're competing with other solution providers. We feel very good about that. And that's why we can talk about standards, because the more standards that are out there, the more traceability will happen.
Well, and the opportunity is just to get better and better and to broaden the services as much as possible. Have you also thought about post-use? I mean, we've talked about the things coming into the store or into the home. Could we be tracing what comes back out and begin to manage the waste away?
Oh my gosh, you're opening a can of worms, because I love that topic. Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to say again and again that to have unique identification that, GS1 standards offer would be to have unique value. So
Mhm.
when you start to be able to assign that unique identity to a repairable product or something that could go into remanufacturing, suddenly that traceability information, the provenance, the origins of it is extremely important, because having that full life cycle view of something allows you to make better decisions on it and allows you to tailor the approach to it. And that is fundamentally what the circular economy is really all about. So I would say that yes, the traceability that we're talking about today, aspirationally, we want to be able to accelerate a circular economy.
Yep.
There's so much more we could talk about, but we are out of time. And I want to thank both of you, Jason and Vivian, for the time today. And please come back and tell us more as this continues to evolve.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having me back.
That was my conversation with Universal Product Code provider GS1's Director of Innovation, Vivian Tai, and Jason Berryhill, co-founder of Wholechain, about their collaboration to launch the Wholechain Cattle Traceability Program globally. And as we heard, there are myriad potential applications of standardized product transparency data to explore in future conversations. You can learn more about Wholechain at wholechain.com. Wholechain's all one word, no space, no dash, and about GS1's traditional rectangular barcodes and next generation 2D QR code, the GS1 digital link, at www.gs1us.org. That's gs1us.org. Jason mentioned the comment by science fiction writer William S. Gibson that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. The advent of product traceability, the ability to explore the provenance of a product, its packaging, and ultimately what happens to it after consumption, is an important moment that consumers should not ignore. The negotiation about what kind of information that we have access to as food buyers at a grocery store or as consumers browsing the aisles of that store or an e-commerce site will have long-lasting consequences for future generations. And we have the opportunity now to shape the information available with a quick scan of our phone. We're just starting to build that dictionary of product data, and Vivian's right. Consumers can help define what we are able to know about our food and the things we buy. Wholechain and GS1 have laid the foundation for a dialogue between brands and consumers, one that could deliver real accountability as well as infinitely more engaging, honest access to product information from companies that have committed to share product information. As Jason mentioned, the grocer Wegmans Seafood now comes with a detailed story about where the fish was caught, when, and whether the vessels complied with international environmental regulations. And that's just one example of how a new story can be told to enable marketing as well as greater profitability for those companies that embrace this strategy. But it was Vivian's enthusiastic endorsement of the potential for post-use information, such as about repairability, recyclability, and the reuse of materials, that signals the importance of Wholechain and GS1's collaboration. When we have a mechanism to track the flow of materials through the economy, from beginning to end and back again for another product life cycle, we will have the basis for a circular economy that can reward every contributor for their participation. Those economic incentives can ignite a revolution in collaboration between makers and users of products around the world. For example, if you recall our recent conversation with Plastic Bank's David Katz, who's working to put a global bottle deposit program in place to incentivize people to clean up plastic beverage bottles, that represents just one system that could be connected to the Wholechain and GS1 system to enable the circular economy. And you can be sure that we're going to be talking with Jason and Vivian again, so stay tuned. But don't just sit there. I hope you'll take a moment to share this podcast or any of the more than 490 interviews that we've produced on sustainability in your ear with your friends, your family, your coworkers. Folks, writing a review on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us. You are the amplifiers that can spread more ideas to create less waste. Please tell everyone they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or their favorite purveyor of podcast goodness. Thank you for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, and we'll be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.